Thank you for joining us. Today's podcast is about the legacy of the Cross-Border Local Research Network. The discussion today will highlight how locally led research can be sustained and fostered in conflict-affected borderlands. Our guests today belong to the Asia Foundation, the Carnegie Middle East Center, and the Rift Valley Institute. My name is Azima Chima, and I'm a researcher. In 2018, the Asia Foundation, the Carnegie Middle East Center, and the Rift Valley Institute came together to bring local research partners in a collective that then became the Cross-Border Local Research Network. The objective was to study the political, economic, and social dynamics in conflict-affected borderlands. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with this research program, what you think your work has been about and what it has achieved?
Great to be here and excited to share our experiences of the local research network. I think you talked about the start date, and I think what's been key about this program is its longevity. So we've been able to work with researchers from across the Horn of Africa and East Africa at the Rift Valley Institute over time. And that's a real privilege and a luxury in the current funding climate that allows us to do research projects over time, establish relationships with local researchers, and do more than one piece of research with these researchers, and really develop these relationships. I think I will hear about it in this conversation, but certainly also what's been so important and such a privilege is how the organizations also have connected and how those researchers from different organizations have been able to connect.
I think one thing that stands out to me of the work that we've been able to do is the adaptability and resilience of the project and the research within what has been a very trying, difficult, challenging period of many countries' history, but also global history. I mean, the situations that we've done research on in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, all countries that have experienced significant political upheaval during the last 5, 6, 7 years. But also our partners in other contexts have also experienced significant political upheaval. And the research that we've done has been really responsive, I think, in those environments. We haven't stuck to a tried and set formula of the issues that we're digging into, but have really allowed the researchers that we've worked with to set the agenda and to engage with different political actors, international donors, international organizations to work out what's important to tell about the situation right now and what hopefully can be done.
Thank you. Mohammed.
And I think that experience allowed us to see the border regions as places where there are early indications of wider trends across the region and in the country itself. So, for instance, when we speak about geopolitical shifts, that's something that we've seen in border regions even before. We've looked at tensions between, for instance, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and border regions in Yemen and Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Oman earlier than it became a mainstream discussion or part of the discussions there. So I think the body of work that we've produced and the engagement between the different parts of the research arms really enriched the field and produced a large number of publications, which will be helpful in later phases when it comes to policy discussions, public debates about these really important issues.
No, thank you. It's very interesting. I think the point that Hannah raises about the longevity of the project, having given us the space and time to foster those relationships. I know many of us have shared a stage many times. We've been able to compare insights. But one of the purposes for today's podcast is not only to reflect on the legacy, but also to highlight some key lessons for others on how to sustainably support local research in conflict-affected borderlands. And that brings me to the point that Mohanad and Nathan both mentioned, the localization aspect of it. This program has highlighted localization as a key feature, almost as a foundational principle. And localization has been referred to as part of the DNA of the project. So I wanted to talk to you about your experience with localization itself. Hannah.
Yeah, I think, as you say, great phrase. It's in the DNA of the project, and actually, it started off being called the Cross-Border Local Research Network, what is now XCEPT. I think all of our organisations aim to amplify what we at RVI call local knowledge. But I think what we're trying to do here is amplify those voices, but also elevate, and we've talked about this in the workshop we've had this week, is elevate what is kind of local political economies, regional political economies to a global, to make global connections. So how are we thinking about our own regions, but also having the ability through this work to connect the researchers and research questions globally?
I think one of the things that's being part of the project we've been running is not just conducting the research and doing the policy meetings and the public briefings and conferences and whatnot. It's also been about the direct engagement that we've had with the local research network, which is essentially the network of researchers that we're working with across all the different countries and regions that we're based. And going in, starting this project, there was an emphasis or a focus on capacity building, which is a useful way to think about, engaging with researchers, early career researchers from any locale, giving them skills and tools to be able to help them progress their career. It's really this co-creation process, making sure that there's horizontal conversations between researchers, commissioning organizations, the donor and others, and really trying to flatten this hierarchical model, because there is much that we can learn from the local researchers that we work with.
I'll build on what Nathan and Hannah said about the local networks and the importance of elevating these voices. I think what we've done is we've produced a large number of publications, but most of them were focused on what the local realities are. The cultural values, the clans and their own interactions and their cross-border relations, the geopolitical impact on the hard borders that were imposed on these cross-border relations, and also the smuggling and its contribution to the local economies, gender issues, all of these that we've covered through the local network. I see this as a long-term process. I mean, we've done 7 years of research, but I think the years that are to come, we'll see more policy debates go back to these papers. We're talking about border regions which were marginalized by the central state. And so these border regions have little studies out on them. They've been understudied across the years, and I think that's part of the marginalization process.
I just wanted to underscore that when we're talking about amplifying, what we're talking about is making sure that the people we're learning from and that we're exchanging a capacity with are having access to these high status spaces, by which we mean donor engagement, national government level engagement, and really supporting them to set the agenda, set their research agenda that they are interested in, and making sure that that is at the forefront of what we're trying to do.
I mean, you're triggering, reflections in me as well. For I was wondering that shifting the unit of analysis to the peripheries, i.e. the borderlands, was something of a radical shift in the research agenda anyway. But then also changing the structure where you are primarily led by local insights, I think has contributed, great value, particularly at least in my region. Again, as Mohanad said, these are understudied spaces. Mostly the narration comes from the international media or international outlets, and we've been able to inform that through local insights that have been able to situate whatever geopolitical shift is taking place in the timeline, not just in the context, but within that chronology of events, in the fabric, in the DNA of those borderlands. And I think that that's been hugely valuable.
And I think what's interesting to reflect on is who are the actors that we're trying to influence in these areas that we've been doing the research. And obviously this is a project that's funded by an international donor, but quite often the political networks or the governing networks on the ground that actually operate in these areas they're the ones that have the responsibility for trying to take forward positive policy action rather than an international organization otherwise. I mean, there are some examples of international actors. We did the work that the Center for Peace and Justice did from Brack University, the work they did looking at livelihoods amongst Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. That heavily fed into what the World Food Programme was doing on the ground in regards to their aid and support, looking at the challenges that refugees were having in meeting their livelihoods needs and otherwise. That's a unique situation. In Mindanao in the southern Philippines, our work wasn't going to international actors. It was going to the new Bangsamoro transitional government, which was developing its own laws and policies around cross-border trade and the trade of rice and things like that. I hope that the work that we've been doing now on Rohingya refugees model law, which Sanjeev just presented at the workshop, can have a similar impact and not just go to international donors or international agencies, but also feed into what national governments, regional governments are thinking and trying to do on certain issues.
Well, I think my colleagues have given good examples of the very kind of real and tangible impact the particular pieces of research have had. I think we also, with kind of 250 pieces of evidence, we can also talk about how we're kind of resetting or changing the debate or the narrative. So one of the things we talk about is centering the periphery, and we talk about working across borders. So we're trying to influence the way that policymakers, the way that researchers themselves, the way that communities think about their situations, whether that's through kind of cooperation, whether that's through kind of conflict management. But it is about, over a project of this period, over a project that's produced the amount of evidence that it has, really shifting the debate. And that is about, as I say, centering the periphery and about the importance of these border regions in particular.
I mean, wow, you said 250 pieces of work. That's not just a large body of work, it's a large body of experience as well, right? So what have we learned? I'm interested to hear what you think are the key lessons from this 7 years of experience. How have we learned to achieve change? How have we learned to do things better? How have we learned to sustain and localize and improve the environment for research and insights? Mohanad, please.
Yeah, in terms of the border regions are marginalized and having and building these research networks locally, I think we've learned the value of that and the value of capacity building as part of institutional growth. But we also, when you look at this project, there are so many interesting sides of it. But one interesting side of it is that you have 3 organizations from 3 distant parts of the world collaborating together. And the way we've done it and we've designed it is also, the local researchers were engaging and exchanging their ideas and each other's work, and understanding how similar these trends and how global these trends are. And I think these collaborations, we hope that they will remain. And I see great value in them. And I hope to see, more collaboration to come in the next phase after the project.
I think learning, I think what we've learned is that in some ways the world is smaller than we think. I mean, there's so much comparative learning that's come from just talking about situations or border regions that are half a world away from each other. But I think the one big takeaway that's really affected me in the way I think about the world is going into this project, the borderlands or border regions were seen as these, far-flung, peripheral areas where There was unruly behavior, no governance, economic activity was always crime and illicit trade and things like that. But what we learn is that these areas have functioning ecosystems of political, social, and economic exchange. They might be built on traditional ties. They might be built on informal forms of governance. They interact with the formal forms of governance, of course they do. But these systems have their own agency and resiliency and the people who live in those areas have their own agency for sure. And that's something that needs to be understood, looked at, supported, and support the positive elements of that. Try and work to limit the negative impacts.
Especially with emerging challenges and transnational threats such as climate change. Exactly. We have a new range of challenges to address. Hannah, what have we learned?
And I think building on that, Azima, is a key question is, what are the untapped potentials, or are we recognizing the potentials in borderlands? Because as Mahan had said at the beginning, a lot of the issues that we see emerging often emerge first in these areas. So what can we learn and what can we do? But I think maybe for me the key is how do we leverage this program to meet the needs of the researchers, to meet the needs of the local researchers in terms of their research interests, as well as meeting the interests of the policy audience. But I think, what our researchers always also tell us, and I think let's always remember this kind of the human element of what we're trying to do. Everyone goes into this research because they're interested in trying to improve the livelihoods of the people, of the communities that they're working in.
I think that's a really important point. We focus a lot on the contributions of the program to policy making and decision making. And improving our understanding, but at the end of the day, it has a direct impact on the human side of it. We have, through this process, become advocates for those marginalized communities you referenced in the borderlands. But I hope that this conversation is some small reflection of conversations that we have been having across the cross-border local research network as we conclude the project. But we would, I'm sure, be happy to hear from you about your experiences with the research. Thank you very much.